Thousands of years ago, in the land of Israel, a great conflict was taking place. Two powerful armies stood facing each other across a wide valley. On one side were the Israelites, the people chosen by God, and on the other side were the Philistines, their longtime enemies. Both armies were prepared for battle. Soldiers carried swords, shields, and spears. Tents were set up across the hills. The air was filled with tension because everyone knew that a great war could begin at any moment. But something unusual happened. Instead of both armies attacking each other, the Philistines decided to send out their strongest warrior to challenge the Israelites. This warrior was named Goliath. Goliath was not an ordinary soldier. According to the Bible, he was a giant from the city of Gath. He stood about 9 feet tall, making him much taller than any normal man. His size alone made him terrifying to look at. Goliath wore heavy armor made of bronze. The helmet on his head was made of bronze, and his body was protected by a massive coat of armor that weighed many kilograms. His legs were protected by bronze guards, and he carried a large javelin across his back. In his hand he held a giant spear. The Bible describes the shaft of his spear as being like a weaver's beam, and the iron tip of the spear alone weighed several kilograms. Before Goliath even stepped into battle, another soldier walked in front of him carrying a huge shield. When the Israelites saw Goliath standing in the valley, they were filled with fear. Every morning and every evening, Goliath came forward and shouted a challenge toward the army of Israel. He called out loudly so everyone could hear him. "Why do you come out to line up for battle? Choose one man and let him come down to fight me." Then Goliath explained the challenge. "If he can fight me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I defeat him and kill him, then you will become our servants." The giant then mocked the Israelites and insulted their army. Day after day, Goliath repeated this challenge. The soldiers of Israel listened to him with fear. No one dared to fight him. Even King Saul, the king of Israel, was deeply afraid. For 40 days, Goliath came out every morning and every evening, shouting his challenge across the valley. Imagine what that must have felt like for the soldiers of Israel. Every day they woke up knowing the giant would return. Every day they hoped someone would step forward. But no one did. The giant seemed impossible to defeat. While this was happening at the battlefield, something very different was happening in a small town called Bethlehem. In that town lived a young shepherd boy named David. David was the youngest son of a man named Jesse. Jesse had 8 sons, and David was the youngest of them all. While David's older brothers were strong enough to join the army and fight in battles, David stayed home to take care of his father's sheep. Being a shepherd was not an easy job. David spent long days and nights in the fields watching over the flock. He had to guide the sheep to green pastures and make sure they had water to drink. But the fields were also dangerous. Wild animals such as lions and bears sometimes attacked the sheep. When that happened, David had to defend the flock. The Bible tells us that David once chased away a lion and even fought a bear in order to save a sheep from its mouth. David was brave, but his courage did not come from his strength alone. David trusted God. When he was alone in the fields, he prayed and sang songs to God. He often played music on his harp and praised God under the open sky. These quiet moments built a deep faith inside David's heart. He believed that God was always with him and would help him in times of danger. One day, David's father Jesse called him and gave him an important task. Jesse said, "Take this food to your brothers who are with the army and see how they are doing." When the message reached King Saul, he was curious. For 40 days, no warrior had stepped forward to fight the giant. Now he heard that a young shepherd boy was speaking with unusual courage. David was brought before the king. King Saul looked at him carefully. He expected to see a strong warrior wearing armor and carrying weapons. Instead, he saw a young boy who looked more like a shepherd than a soldier. Saul spoke to him and said, "You cannot fight this Philistine. You are only a boy, and he has been a warrior since his youth." But David answered the king with calm confidence. "My lord, I have been taking care of my father's sheep. When a lion or a bear comes and attacks the flock, I go after it and rescue the sheep from its mouth." The soldiers listening nearby were surprised by his words. David continued speaking. "If the animal attacks me, I grab it and strike it until it dies. I have killed both a lion and a bear while protecting my father's sheep." Then David said something powerful. "The same God who rescued me from the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine." The room became quiet. King Saul could see that David truly believed what he was saying. It was not arrogance. It was faith. Finally Saul nodded slowly and said, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." King Saul ordered his servants to bring his royal armor for David. They placed a bronze helmet on David's head and covered his body with armor. They also gave him a sword. David tried to walk. But after a few steps, he stopped. The armor was heavy and uncomfortable. David had never fought wearing armor before. He looked at the king and said, "I cannot fight in these. I am not used to them." So David removed the armor. Instead, he chose the tools he knew best. He picked up his shepherd's staff. Then he walked down to a nearby stream. There, he searched among the stones and chose 5 smooth stones. He placed them carefully into his shepherd's bag. In his hand he carried his sling. To many soldiers, this looked ridiculous. A young shepherd boy with a sling and 5 stones was about to face the most feared warrior in the land. But David trusted God more than weapons. And with courage in his heart, he began walking toward the battlefield. As David approached the valley, the giant Goliath stepped forward again. When he saw David coming toward him, he looked confused. Then he began to laugh. Goliath saw that David was only a boy. The giant shouted loudly, "Am I a dog that you come against me with sticks?" He mocked David and cursed him. Then Goliath said, "Come here, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." The giant believed the battle would be over in seconds. But David was not afraid. He stood firm and answered the giant with powerful words. "You come against me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin. But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel whom you have defied." David continued speaking boldly. "Today the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. These people will know that the Lord does not save with sword or spear, because the battle belongs to the Lord." The soldiers on both sides listened in silence. A shepherd boy was speaking with incredible courage. As David approached the valley, the giant Goliath stepped forward again. When he saw David coming toward him, he looked confused. Then he began to laugh. Goliath saw that David was only a boy. The giant shouted loudly, "Am I a dog that you come against me with sticks?" He mocked David and cursed him. Then Goliath said, "Come here, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." The giant believed the battle would be over in seconds. But David was not afraid. He stood firm and answered the giant with powerful words. "You come against me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin. But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel whom you have defied." David continued speaking boldly. "Today the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. These people will know that the Lord does not save with sword or spear, because the battle belongs to the Lord." The soldiers on both sides listened in silence. A shepherd boy was speaking with incredible courage. Goliath became angry and began walking toward David. The ground shook beneath the giant's heavy steps. But instead of running away, David ran toward the giant. As he ran, he reached into his bag and took out one of the smooth stones. He placed it in his sling. Then he began to swing the sling around his head. Faster and faster it moved through the air. At the right moment, David released the stone. The stone flew across the battlefield with incredible speed. It struck Goliath directly in the forehead. The giant suddenly stopped. He lost his balance. Then the massive warrior fell face down onto the ground. The giant who had terrified an entire army for 40 days had been defeated by a single stone. David ran forward and stood over the fallen giant. Since David did not have a sword, he took Goliath's own sword and used it to finish the battle. When the Philistine army saw their champion defeated, they became terrified and began to run. The soldiers of Israel suddenly found courage. They chased the Philistines and won a great victory that day. The story of David and Goliath has inspired people for thousands of years. It reminds us that true strength does not always come from physical power. Goliath had size, armor, and weapons. But David had faith. He believed that God was greater than any giant. And that faith gave him courage when everyone else was afraid. In life, we all face giants. Sometimes those giants are fear. Sometimes they are problems that seem impossible to solve. Sometimes they are challenges that make us feel small and powerless. But the story of David teaches us something important. No giant is greater than faith. With courage, determination, and trust in God, even the smallest person can overcome the biggest challenges. That is why the story of David and Goliath continues to inspire people all around the world. It reminds us that victory does not always belong to the strongest. Sometimes, victory belongs to the one who believes the most.